But what he got choked up about was talking about how rare it was for his father to give him encouragement. He had all the crowds in every stadium he ever went to just roaring his name. And his dad was like, meh, And so, yeah, encourage your child, but don't just encourage them for what they're doing. Encourage them for who they are and whose they are.
Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Dad, have you ever read that verse, Proverbs 22:6? Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he grows older, he will not abandon it. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, and we're going to talk about whether your kids have an inclination toward a certain skill. Maybe it's math or drawing or music or listening or working with their hands, and how you can discover and nurture that. And especially if it's something that you don't know yourself, actually, that presents you with a very interesting relational opportunity. We're going to dive into that today on the Father on Purpose podcast. Lawson, how are you, my friend?
What up, my man? Doing great.
Yo, yep, I'm so pumped about today.
Before we dive in, well, go ahead. I'll get to it after this.
Before we dive in, sorry, Lawson, Mountain Monday is our newsletter that over 22,000 dads subscribe to. Every single Monday, we ship out a short Bible devotional. We tell you about our latest podcast episode. We tell you about our latest blog article. We give you some great quotes by other people and a nifty action item for that specific week. It's called Mountain Monday. It's entirely free. That's FREE, free. Mountain Monday. Sign up today at manhoodjourney.org. That's manhoodjourney.org. Lawson, what were you going to say before I rudely interrupted you with today's public service announcement?
Not at all. I forgot the script, the opening, the PSA.
That's code for why were you talking when I'm supposed to be talking?
What's up, everybody out there? I hope you guys are enjoying, and we love doing this podcast. It's great for us. Not only our friendship, but our fathering and our faith. It has been for me. I was wondering, I didn't really have a whole lot of talent brimming out of me at a younger age.
But you do now? Has that changed?
Yeah, really. Yeah, right. I still can't do an instrument at all. I wonder what my parents, when I was in my young teens, were like, I don't know what in the world he's going to do. He can't play a musical instrument. We've tried 3. He's way too little for football or sports. He's not all that fast. Frankly, not making great grades. So I bet they were just
hey, you reminded me. I want to tell Dad listening. I want to tell Dad listening before we get too far in the show. Most of the time, these shows just descend and descend, and they get worse and worse as it goes on. So don't listen to the back half. But today, that's different. I'm only kidding. I hope we always end on a high note. Today, we're actually going to end on a literal high note, and that is the world premiere. I think it's fair to say it's the world premiere of the very first song that my son Alex, who is 24, lives in Nashville, he has written his very first song. It's just coming out on Spotify, and we got a secret sneak bootleg version of it. And we're going to play that at the end of today's show. So if you're in for like a musical interlude, hang out with us to the very end of the show, and we're going to play the song in full. It's called Skyscraper. We hope you love it. And it kind of ties a little bit in to today's show episode. Sorry, Lawson, I wanted to make sure before you were pining about how your parents spotted the complete dearth of talent in your life at a young age. When did it shift for you? And I'm kidding a little, of course, but you were in the Marine Corps, you've run businesses, you have done all kinds of physical feats, Tough Mudders and triathlons and all this. You've done a lot in your lifetime, stayed married to one lady for a whole lifetime so far. You're not dead yet. And you got 2 amazing daughters. So, kidding aside, you might not be able to play the ukulele, but you sure have a whole lot of skill that has served you well in both life and business. When did some of those things sort of dawn on you when you were like, hey, I kind of am bent this way, or I have a tendency to be able to, I don't know, figure things out or network with people? Or what were some of the things that, maybe in your late teens or early 20s or mid 20s, you started to realize I am kind of actually bent this way. I'm pretty good at thing X.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll tie it into some of the other content that we want to get to. Because I was trying to
just answer my question. Just you gotta answer the question.
Are you?
I've had too much coffee.
Hey, Hunter,
today.
Turn off interrupt mode on Kent because he cannot shut up. So talking about dads with their kids, I in high school finally found something I loved and was good at, and that was marksmanship. We had a ROTC outfit at this big public school I went to. It was a really well-known one. It did well in all these national kind of competitions, and to the point that we had an indoor rifle range. And I got on the team, fell in love with it. It became this real discipline that focused me, and I love my teammates. But the thing was, it was not a spectator sport for practice. We practiced 2-3 hours a day, and it's the same thing over and over and over. So the dad isn't going to sit in some bleachers and watch us. It's kind of like watching swim practice. If you guys out there have a kid in swim practice, it's all these kids splashing around and back and forth, and the board is confusing. And you look out on the swimming pool, can't even identify your own kid. All you see is heads bobbing. And so similarly, I've thought back about my own dad. I would say contrasting that with like a dad who is like one of the main coaches for their child's sports team, or is really involved in sideline activity, and comes to all the practices, and it's open and it's active and it's fun, and you meet other parents. That can be a great thing. I was thinking back because I have a point to make, and I'll get to it. Don't you interrupt me. I see you.
Take your time.
Of like, we can get involved, but where is that line? How do you draw the distinction between being supportive and engaged versus out of touch, or on the converse of that, maybe domineering and maybe overly engaged, and just, like you live and breathe for your kids' talent to flourish, and that adds additional pressure to the kid. It adds kind of a weird, I think, strained dynamic. It can, I should say, it can. And so I don't know. I was just thinking about back then. You didn't have such involvement from parents in everything that your child does, but I think today, more often than not, I wonder, are kids under tremendous pressure to do something, maybe not even be good at it, but like all the parents are very, very involved. Do you know where I'm going with that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, especially and that's why I kind of teased the early idea that if your child develops an aptitude for something that maybe you're not particularly gifted at or didn't do as a youngster, it presents you with a golden opportunity. And here's the golden opportunity. In my case, my oldest son was good with music. He just kind of, I don't want to say, it wasn't like some savant where he was playing the piano at 3. But what I mean is, once he got into music, he liked it a lot and wanted to practice a lot. Like we all have things like maybe taking out the garbage or taking a bath, you have to force your children to do. I never had to force, my son, I'm thinking in this case, my oldest son, I never had to force him to go practice guitar. It's like what he would do with his free time. He loved it. Then he got kind of nerdy on the tech side where he would be soldering and rebuilding things and restringing guitars and pulling guts out and putting guts in, and understood the mechanics. And I'm like, whoa. So my point is, I know very little about that. And in fact, if I know an ounce of it, it's because he taught me the whole ounce I do know. Like I know, I have no other framework other than, I like to play some music and I like to sing and offend everybody around me because I'm no good. But in his case, he would understand like music theory and what keys were this. And he would explain it to me, and you could tell by my blank expression and my like blink, blink. He was like, you don't understand anything I'm saying, do you? And I'm like, no, but I'm trying. And here's kind of my point is if your child develops an aptitude at something, you can become a student of that. And you can become hyper inquisitive about how that works and explain it to me again. And still to this day, let me see, he's 24, probably started music in guitar, I should say 11 or 12 or so. So here we are 12 years later. And sadly, if he were to show me a Stratocaster or a Telecaster, I still don't know the difference, even though he has told me 100 times, here's the difference, which must just mean I'm not a very good listener. My point in saying all that is sometimes dads want to, like, if you grew up, being a fan of a certain team or doing a certain activity or whatever it is, you want to implant that on your children. And sometimes that's not bad. I mean, I never robbed a bank, for example, and I would love for my children to grow up and they could also make it to their 20s and say, I too have never robbed a bank. And so there are things about my childhood I would like to map on, or my value system I want to map onto my children. But like what they're going to do for a career or what they're going to chase as a hobby, that's probably not one of them. And so I think there's an opportunity in there for dads. If we'll get inquisitive and we'll ask questions, man, we can have a blast just learning about something that we know very little about.
Right. Totally. Like your son who just fell into being, and he was really good at it, and kind of in his free time, you didn't have to force him to go do it. He just went and picked it up. Someone told me to watch the David Beckham documentary on Netflix. It just came out. So I downloaded it for the airplane, and man, oh man, it is really interesting. And this isn't a commercial for the David Beckham show, but I will say he too, from a time he could hardly, walk around good, was just out there with the ball, kicking a ball around, and like his parents are saying, it never stopped. He was always with the ball. And I found something interesting that in the show they talk about, that David Beckham talks about. His father was at everything. His father was obsessed with European football. But he hardly ever gave David any encouragement. He never, never said, wow, son, that was fantastic. You are killing it. You're doing great. Even though every other parent on the sidelines was like, who's that kid? And his dad was just this stoic, kind of non-encourager. And it made me think, on the other hand, sometimes I've been guilty of it. Many of us have been guilty of it because we love our kids so much. If we see them doing something, even though we know they're not great at it, where do you enforce this thought of realistic expectations to build into them some character of, hey, look, you're not the best at it necessarily, but you're holding your own, and you're a good teammate. And so I would bring all that back to finding out what your kids are talented, gifted for, interested in, and then going in there with them on that, even if it shifts and changes over time. Not everybody's going to be a David Beckham, obviously. That is okay. But being in it with them is much more, I think, important. And what we are told in Scripture is to be in there with them and use it for life lessons versus who won the game, who shot the winning shot, who was the best on stage, whatever it may be. Yeah. It's not about them in their talent and where they are with it and how we maybe identify ourselves in it as well, but it's about what's going on in their heart and in their development.
The other thing, Lawson, that you bring up, which is super interesting, is the fine line between reinforcing and encouraging our children in an area where they're naturally gifted, perhaps. Maybe they have a talent, maybe they have hand-eye coordination, or they're good with numbers, or whatever. They may have just a design to them that is unique in the way something comes naturally to them. more so than others. Not that, and I don't want to put like learning how to play guitar as some natural. Alex worked at it for thousands of hours. Like he literally has probably a couple thousand hours in learning how to play guitar well. So I don't want to chalk it up to some, he was just blessed at birth with, the sprinkling of how to play a chord. He's learned all that. But my point in that is there's this fine line between encouraging our kids, as Proverbs 22:6, I think would indicate, in the way they should go, in their kind of unique manner, their unique bent of how they're wired and what they're gifted at, and even what opportunities come available to them, and then making that their God. Like there's this fine line between saying, hey man, God's given you the ability to sing, or God's given you the ability with numbers. Therefore, your whole identity is in being an accountant or a banker. No, that's not their identity. That is a gifting that they have. So if you look at the book of Exodus, I love to talk about this because folks want to get all bent out of shape about the difference between spiritual gifts and talents or abilities. Spiritual gifts and talents or abilities. And spiritual gifts, 4 places in the New Testament, we can talk about all those, but essentially the gifts that the Spirit gives us for the furtherance of God's kingdom. Mm-hmm. And people want to talk about these stark contrasts between spiritual gifts and talents and abilities. However, if you look at the word we would use for the word wisdom in the Old Testament, a lot of time, hundreds of times, we'd use the word wisdom, where if you go look at what that root Hebrew word is, and you look at where it's used, it is an ability direct from God. So when God was instructing Moses to build the tabernacle in Exodus, there are people who were given certain abilities, down to even like gifting with carving out of gold, or gifting with woodwork, or gifting with linens and weaving. And God gave certain people gifts, abilities that allowed them to do their part of building the tabernacle. So there's this, I don't like this whole stark difference. I think they're overlapping circles. It's like a Venn diagram. You got spiritual gifts. They are different. They are different than natural abilities. However, God gives them both. God gives them both. And so the challenge is we can try to make either of those, either our spiritual gifts, or we can make our natural talents and abilities like a little mini God. And we put that above everything. Well, God gave me the ability, to speak and communicate. Therefore, I should always run my mouth and never listen. And it's like, no, that's not how that works. And so for us, I think as we're looking into the lives of our children, we want to find and draw out their unique gifting without setting that unique gifting up on a little altar and making it a little God. Because one day they may not have that gift anymore. Like they may have a good singing voice, and then there's an accident and they lose their ability to sing, or they can't sing as good as they used to.
Good point.
And then what are they? Oh, wow. We've stilted them up in this scaffolding. And when the scaffolding gets pulled down, so we've got to get back to, I think you were pointing out, Lawson, in some of our show notes, where is their identity? Where is their identity? And it's not just in their gifting.
And they can assume some of that from us as dads, meaning good and bad, meaning we could be the dad that is so wrapped up in our child's, finding of talent and excelling at it, and being maybe even something that we tried ourselves to be as a kid and couldn't make it, but then our kid comes along and they're much more gifted and talented. And so be careful, dad, how much emphasis we put on the thing versus the lessons that can come. Proverbs 22 verse 6 says, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he grows older, he will not abandon it. And so training up a child in the way he should go does not mean, hey, I think football is your calling, or I think theater is your calling. That's not what it means when it says train up a child in the way he should go. They're going to go do things. And so while you're in it with them, what lessons are there to be captured through the development of these skills? Kids can learn how to be good teammates. They can learn how to win with grace, how to lose and fail well, some humility, and these things that you can tie back into what God is trying to teach us through life and through things that we are interested in, things that we're gifted and things that we love doing and are good at it as your kid is developing, how to try new things. I personally bounced around in multiple things and it had to have been a little bit, I think, maybe frustrating back then for my parents to be like, oh, he's given up on another thing.
Yeah. And Lawson, to your point, what happens, Romans 1:25 says that they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worshiped and served the created thing rather than the creator, who is forever praised. And so what happens is we take the gifting and we start to worship the gifting, whether that's a athletic ability or musical ability, or, again, you can paint, you can head for numbers, whatever it is. And we start to worship that. There's a difference between drawing it out, acknowledging it, praising God for it, thanking God. Hey, I'm good with numbers, versus saying, oh man, now that I'm good with numbers, I'm just going to squash people. We're going to worship God, the creator, not worship the created thing. And I think that's a distinction that as parents, it doesn't necessarily come natural to us to do that. But over time, we can get to the place where we can say things like, hey, you really seem to have, a nose for this. I'll just use sports because it's easy. You seem to really have a nose for this game. Like, you kind of know where to put your body, where to be, when to let go of the ball, when to hold on to it. Isn't it cool how God gave you that ability? Like, that would be the place for us to drop in a praise and a thank you to the maker, and not just glorify the fact that, and you know what? You might get a D1 scholarship if we play our cards right. Like, not that those are wrong, but I'm saying, like, man, even throughout that process, we want to continually to acknowledge the creator, not just the actual created thing or the gift.
What do you think about this? Colossians 3:23-24. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. In context, Kent, of, I wonder if we're not seeing a bit of a movement, or either at least maybe the sports shows are portraying more often players when they're being interviewed are giving credit to God or talking about their faith, or interrupting a press conference and going, kind of openly hard on like their faith and what it means to them. And even ignoring, I've seen some where they ignore the question asked completely and talk about their faith and their teammates. And, do you feel like that is portraying that Colossians 3:23, where they may be great. They're clearly great because they're on television, but they're reflecting back that they're not doing it only for the game or for the love of the game.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about verse 24 in that stretch, we often quote verse 23, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord, not for men. But there's a comma. And if, as you did, Lawson, if you keep going, it says, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. I think what I find interesting about some of those after game interviews is usually they're interviewing the winner, and the winner is, quote unquote, giving glory to God for the ability to, quote unquote, win the game. Not always, but there are times when it's as if they're saying, man, I'm so glad God was on our side today because we really needed the victory. And I think I've also heard some who have been interviewed in a losing context, and I like those even better.
Me too.
Because those are the ones where the guy says, hey, you know what? You go out there, you give your best. And in the end, God be praised. I'm glad he gave us a chance to even be this far. And there's an attitude in that verse 24 that says you will receive the inheritance as your reward. Right now, as we record this, I'm just mindful of the fact that there was a game last night. The team won their 7th game, and they're moving on to the next and final stage of a big, the Rangers moved on for the World Series. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, man, they're going to win a reward that is the opportunity to play for, the 2023 baseball championship. In verse 24 of Colossians, that's not the inheritance that Paul's talking about.
Right. Yeah.
You might get a World Series ring, or you might get the bonus, or you might have your name in the history books. What it is he's saying, look, eternal life that never ends, life that has no pain, no suffering, life that's always, full of joy and bliss. That life is the reward that you get at the end. And it's interesting because we often put the work heartily as for the Lord. Well, I'm gonna work hard. I'm gonna Colossians 3:23, so I can get the promotion. Great. Awesome. I hope you get promoted. Having said that, that's not the reward. It's not the inheritance. The inheritance is eternal life, man. And I don't care what earthly inheritance we get. This is way better than that.
Well said, man. That's the more conversations we have with our kids as they're growing into their whatever their interests are, their skills, their talents. I think that is what our role as dads needs to center around. Not just, it's not that you want your kid to go and get into something that they feel like is their talent, but they just continue to struggle with over and over and over. And they, are on teams and never win the game. Winning can be fun. But I'm saying, regardless of what it is, regardless of the outcomes, there's so much in it that can be useful in the development of our relationship with our kids and our ability to support, go along with what God is doing in them as he develops their faith in him and their understanding of who they are in him.
Yeah. And can we strike that right balance as dads where we are excited and encouraging their abilities, whatever those are. I remember when my second oldest son was younger and he just had an aptitude for drawing. He always kind of did. He liked to do it. We would actually do drawing, not competitions, but we would do drawing together where he would draw something on a page. He'd hand it to me. I would draw something. I'd hand it back to him. And that was a way that we just had fun occasionally. And in the end, it looked like a weird kind of Mad Lib, and I'd draw some circle and he'd turn into a ninja, and I was like, wow, I didn't see a ninja coming out of that or whatever. And it was a way that he and I could play together when he was younger, but also it was in an area of his unique strength. Now, I mean, I'm a decent drawer as well, so I didn't mind it, but like for me, that was an area where I could just encourage that skill. And then now you kind of fast forward and he's in college to be an architect. And even if he doesn't decide to be an architect, it's not the point. The point is that's an area where he's naturally wired. He has the ability to see spaces and to see creativity. Even when he got his first, iPhone and he would take pictures, you're like, wow, that's a interesting angle for that photo. Like he just had an eye for things that are a bit more creative. And, imagine if I came to him and just said, hey, you're going to need to learn how, math and be an accountant one day, it just crush his soul. Like, that's not how he's wired. And so for us as dads, I think we just have to be mindful. We have to be mindful of a couple pitfalls when it comes to like a Proverbs 22:6 or this verse. One of the pitfalls is we tend to train up a child in the way we want them to go. I went to this place, your granddaddy went to this place, you're going to go to this or whatever that is. And it's like, maybe. I think the other sort of pitfall or danger zone is that if we don't understand it, we don't reinforce it. And so I don't understand music, so music must be from the devil. I'm just going to stop doing, you can't do that. And so for us, I think my wife and I have talked a lot about, I remember honestly when Alex was 13, 14, 15, and he would be wanting to practice guitar, April and I would say, let him. There's a lot of ways for a 14-year-old to do destructive things with their life. This burns the clock. This is if you remember before the shot clock back in the 80s, if that was even before Dean Smith was the four corners, man, he would just pass the ball around and run the clock out before you had a shot clock. For us, there are some productive pursuits of those teenage years, especially for boys, that we thought, yeah, let him. We invested in gear, we invested in concerts, we invested in, equipment and training and teachers and things along that line. And so for us, we're now just starting. Well, in fact, what's funny, Lawson, is I don't know that we ever really mention this very often, but if you listen to this podcast, the beginning music and the music that we cut to in the middle and the music that winds it down at the end is music that my oldest son created. So Alex is the author of the musical bumpers on the Father on Purpose podcast. We got him back before he was famous, and he did that for free. What a sucker. What a total sucker. And so, my point is eventually what's cool is you've probably been here, Lawson, where your daughters in their area of gifting has now, as they're in their 20s, it's started to bless and encourage you. Like it's coming kind of full circle,
big time,
where you encourage them early. And now that they can do this, whatever that thing is, now you and Audrey are encouraged in probably many ways by your daughter's gifts and talents.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I want to kind of underline and maybe sum up a little bit of what I was trying to say earlier. And that is, I remember giving encouragement to the girls, and, we did a lot not right over many, many years. But I think something that had an impact was focusing less on what it was and who they were among the team or on the show, or, depending on what your kid's doing, how they fit in with that thing, that activity, that skill, that passion. Would encourage them by saying, I'm so proud of who you are, and not just who you are, but whose you are.
Yeah.
Bob Russell said that, I remember, a long time ago at Southeast Christian Church. I remember him specifically saying that from the pulpit, that God looks at us and says, I'm proud of who you are, and I'm proud of whose you are. And for us as dads, it's really important that our children hear us tell them, like David Beckham went on to be the world's greatest European footballer. But what he got choked up about was talking about how rare it was for his father to give him encouragement. He had all the crowds in every stadium he ever went to just roaring his name. And his dad was like, meh, And so, yeah, encourage your child, but don't just encourage them for what they're doing. Encourage them for who they are and whose they are.
Man, I've never met a dad. Well, okay, that's not true. I actually have met dads, but most of the dads that I know and that I respect would care more about their children's character development and their walk with the Lord, for example, than they would their kids' either economic or career development. And for us, I think that it's very tempting, especially in what I'll call the West, in like America. It's very tempting for us to be focused on, one of the famous questions you ask any 11 or 12-year-old is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Man, I think like deep down, that's probably the wrong question. It's probably the wrong question.
Yeah, it's a good thought.
The question is more like, who do you want to be when you grow up? Like, not necessarily what do you want to be doing? And that's not wrong. I mean, it's not evil to say I want to be an architect or, a painter or whatever. But I think the real question for me is, what would you like to be like when you grow up? Like what kind of, my son, Jonathan, was recently talking to me about something that he noticed at work, and he had given something for free to a customer at his job. And I said, wow, that's really cool that your company lets you just decide that, and you have that power. And he looked at me kind of with his head cocked and goes, no, I mean, I paid for it. And I was like, wow. So he saw somebody in need. He wanted to, give them a blessing, and he just reached into his pocket and swiped his own card and paid for it. It was not a big deal, but I'm like, oh my goodness, that says so much about his character. And I would rather him do that than, become the president of the company. Like, I just was so thrilled with that character-centric type decision. And then I realized he probably learned that from his mother.
I don't disagree with you on that, dude.
So that's where you're supposed to go. No, Kent, seriously.
Oh no, you're the most gracious. Yeah. I hope, dads, we have given you something to think about. I hope we've encouraged you to get involved with your kid if you aren't. And if you are, not to be maybe a little too much, but find that right balance, find that right place, and focus less on the thing and more on what child you see growing into the development that reflects the God who chose him for that, the God who made him for that.
And if you need to reinforce this idea today. You're listening to this podcast. You're pulling in your driveway after a long, hard day at work, and you need to walk in your door and you need to encourage your children in whose they are and their identity just for fun. Here's just one verse, and then we'll cut to this song you can listen to. But one verse is Ephesians 2:10. It says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." When you walk into your house today, tell your kids that they are God's workmanship and that you are confident that you know they are created in Christ Jesus for good works and that God has prepared them in advance for them to walk in them. And that is where Amen. We're going to anchor our kids' identity. Let's do that. And by the way, as we wrap up today's show, please enjoy, and let's hear a big round of applause. How do you do that in like the digital world? Like
Hunter will do it. Don't you worry.
Driving down the street, just clapping like some weirdo, but like, why is he clapping? He's all by himself in that Honda Civic. Let's hear it for Alex Evans. Thank you so much, Alex, for letting us be the world debut, the world premiere of Skyscrapers, starting now.
Skyscrapers disappearing into the hazy gray above, watching the Cumberland River wind and turn as tangled as love. The colors of life expanding while everything feels like it's changing. I find myself feeling a sense of belonging, finally feeling like I'm home. Look around and see lonely faces, worn out new places. I tie up these laces and go. The streets are familiar, but not what they once were. Pavement starts fading, I'm trading it in my mind. For the times I was lost and the times I didn't know, for the things I've created to fill up these spaces, find myself feeling a sense of believing, finally feeling like I know the days are mine, all I have is time. And I know the sun fades at night, but still it shines. And I know that just tonight the world is mine. And what's dark at night will shine with time.